Hey Michelle, do you know what fusion energy is?
Yeah, so like you take an atom that's just floating through space, maybe looking for a molecule to join up with, or just doing its own thing. Then you spin it around at a really high temperature and pow, smash it together with another atom to make a big nucleus. It's bigger, more powerful, and stronger just because it got combined with another one like it.
Yeah, and when that happens, there's a big release of energy from the leftovers that we can capture and turn into electricity. Except the trick is we don't really know how to do it well yet in a way that the crazy reactions necessary to do it are sustained. So right now it's smash some atoms, fusion reaction, and pow, gone. Start over, smash some atoms, fusion reaction, pow, gone. Pow, gone.
Pow, gone. Pow, gone. Welcome to Propelling Women in Power, a podcast about the careers of women in energy at the Wisconsin Energy Institute on the Uw-Madison campus and our sister institution, the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center.
I am Mary Riker, and I am a junior undergraduate student studying civil engineering. I am a science writer intern with a passion for meeting people from different scientific disciplines and sharing their stories.
And I'm Michelle Chung, a senior undergraduate student studying biology and environmental studies. I love finding fun ways to highlight the research and people here at WEI and GLBRC.
Here, we talk about women scientists and engineers' career paths, the obstacles they have faced, and most importantly, their advice for young women scientists and engineers.
It is our goal to highlight their individual experiences, mentors, and work-life balance while seeking advice for young women in science and asking the question, who and what facilitated your success?
So today we check in with Steffy Diem, an assistant professor in the engineering physics department, who is at the forefront of this research on the UW-Madison campus. And at the same time, she's working on making these reactions work in a continuous way to sustain society's needs for energy. She's also working on ways people like her, women in the nuclear energy field, can sustain themselves and grow to constitute more than just the current 10% of the field. So let's take it away with Steffy.
My name is Steffy Diem. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Engineering Physics. I design microwave systems to heat gas up to millions of degrees, 10 times hotter than the sun, so we can reach fusion conditions.
That's so cool. So you're literally like a nuclear scientist.
Yeah, so my undergrad degree is from UW-Madison in nuclear engineering. Then for my PhD, I switched over to physics. So I have that combination of the applied side of physics and a deep fundamental understanding of physics.
So could you tell me a little bit about how you decided to get into nuclear engineering?
Sure. Great question. Okay. So in high school, I really liked a lot of things. I was a curious person. I liked art. I liked science. I liked math. And I really couldn't decide. I was leaning more towards art actually at the end of high school because I was really unsure of my ability in science because it took me, I found I spent a lot of time on the homework and I thought that was unusual. And it reflected I wasn't good at it. But my parents were like, you know what, why don't you go for engineering? And I had a teacher say that too. They're like, you're actually really good at it and engineers can get jobs. So, I mean, parents are very practical, right? Yeah. So I went to UW-Madison. I didn't know what an engineer did. I didn't even know what kind of engineering I liked. So I talked to a lot of different students here on campus during the weekend where you all kind of register for classes, right? And so I met nuclear engineers and they said, we do a lot of math. We do a lot of physics. I'm like, ooh, that's amazing. And we apply it to clean energy. So I really liked that understanding of physics. And then at the heart of what I like to do is help the world, right? Solve problems that are important to humanity. So that combination was amazing to me. So I'm like, okay, great. I still don't know what an engineer does. I should probably figure this out before I major in it. So second day on campus, I started freaking out because I had no way to pay for school. So I went to my department chair and I said, who is hiring student hourlies? I kind of started going down the list. And the first person that happened to be in their office gave me a tour. And that's the day I learned about fusion energy research. And it was amazing to me because he explained it as kind of what we're trying to do with fusion energy is we heat up gas to millions of degrees. And then it's so hot, the nuclei can fuse together and release a lot of energy. Because the fuel's so hot, you have to be creative about confining the fuel for fusion. So we make magnetic bottles. He described the way you confine the fuel for fusion with these magnetic bottles, kind of like confining jelly with rubber bands. And to me, that was so fascinating because it's a really complex problem and we're actually really good at confining the fuel for fusion with these magnetic bottles. So I was kind of hooked that day when I heard about it.
So I want to jump back to something you said right at the beginning. You said you were unsure of your ability to do these kinds of science and math problems because they took you a long time.
Yeah.
I definitely relate to that because there are certain classes I've taken where I'm just doing the homework. You can do it, but it takes forever. And I know I've talked to other women in engineering, and they see that kind of as a sign that they aren't doing well enough in a class. What would you say to them, or is there a way that you kind of got around that kind of challenge when you were in high school and even in college, I'm sure?
That's a great question. I think it was coming to the realization that everyone takes a long time to do these problems, but no one's talking about it. If they're talking about how long it took them to do a problem, they may be not very truthful with how much effort they're actually putting into it, right? The other thing is, what we're trying to do as engineers and scientists is amazing and complex and life-changing, and that's hard. And there's huge payoffs, and it's fascinating. So of course it's going to take some time to understand that. And not all subjects come naturally to me too. So some I find, different aspect areas, just because it's not something I'm used to, I have to put a little bit more time in to conceptualize it or understand the math behind it. And that's totally okay because you're learning something new to you too.
You did research while you were an undergrad here. How did that experience impact your trajectory or maybe your future to go? Because I know you went to Princeton for your PhD.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It really helps you understand what you like to do and what you don't like to do. So I learned that I like to work with electronics, and that's great. Maybe not build high power circuits to run power systems, but more for the diagnostic scale. So that was good to understand. I found different aspects of fusion energy that I really, really liked. And that kind of gave me the tools into how I'm looking into a graduate program and what I want out of it and kind of what projects I might want.
Were you the only woman in your research group at that time? Were there other women that were there for you to identify with or associate with?
So when I was an undergrad, at some times I was the only one. And other times I was like, maybe there was another one or two.
And how did that translate or change your experience?
Oh, great question. I will say also in my degree program, I was the only one oftentimes too. Mm-hmm. I actually didn't notice it here. I think because the people I had been working with at the time were so inclusive and they really empowered me and my professors. And I'm saying this from my personal experience. I didn't notice it at the time.
So, Michelle, let's cut in for a minute. Do you have a reaction to Steffi's comments?
I thought it was really interesting how she said, yeah, there weren't a lot of other women in her undergraduate program, but what was different was that the people that were in that space empowered her and they were inclusive. So that's an interesting case to where there weren't people that looked like her around her, but the people that were around her were inclusive. Spaces that don't have the identities of people to make them diverse can still be inclusive and empowering.
I think Madison does a good job actually with that for most people of including people even if there aren't others that specifically look like them in their research groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people are always like, well, there's not people to make these programs diverse, but in order to do that, you have to first be inclusive and including, even if there aren't people.
Right. Someone has to be the first person and you have to make them feel welcome enough to then bring in others or tell others that you've had this good experience.
Yeah, it starts somewhere.
Let's hear about the next phase of Steffi's career.
When I went to graduate school, I was working at a national lab setting. It's the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory. And so when you have this mix of, some graduate students, and I was one of only a couple in our graduate program, it did influence actually, I think, my thesis a lot. Dr. Cynthia Phillips, she was one of my thesis advisors, and she was brilliant. She was amazing. She was just someone I wanted to be, and I could see myself in her. And so she really taught the waves class, so how matter and waves move inside of a plasma. And I think that's part of the reason why I specialized in waves, plasma waves, really.
So having a mentor that looked like you and maybe sounded like you really kind of influenced your decision to go into this field too in the first place?
Well, for definitely my specialty.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because that was the first time I had seen a woman working in our field
Okay.
in graduate school. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and I don't think I noticed it at the time, but like looking it back, I can see how much of an influence it made.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I had when I went to college, I was part of a group specifically for women in science and engineering, and I lived with them. It's called the WISE program here at Uw-Madison. Do you think having those kinds of communities helps women succeed? Because in my case, it definitely did. Do you think having had that, maybe, I don't know if like a different version of it in grad school would have helped you or just made you feel better or have those more shared experiences?
I think it definitely would have helped. So especially like looking on after when I went and got a job after grad school, I was the only woman in my division. That is very lonely, and you have no support network, no shared experiences, and I didn't really thrive. And I really wish I would have had that. I think it would have made a huge impact. I will say that having lived through that experience, I don't want anyone to be in that position again. So I love programs like the WISE program. The other program that we have on campus that just started, one of the graduate students in our department, Carolyn Schaefer, started it. She actually got a grant from the American Physical Society from the Committee for Women in Physics. So she started this is across campus. It's the SOLIS group. It's Spanish for the sun, because it's a group for gender minorities and women in plasma physics. And this is across campus. So it's building these networks of people that work in your field, and especially in our field when there are very few women or gender minorities. I think this is very important. And so it's just been so happy to see that, because I wish I would have had that, and seeing them interact and having great experiences, it just makes me so happy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pause for a second. So Meg, what exactly is WISE?
So WISE is the Women in Science and Engineering program here at UW-Madison for women who are interested in going into those fields, who can they can all live together in Waters Hall, and they get certain discussion sections that are all women, and they have activities for women in science to just hang out and get to know each other. And it's a good way to build community as a freshman here. When I took it, it was run by Sue Babcock, who was one of the first women faculty in the Material and Science Engineering program here at Madison. And having a role model like her was really influential to like how I saw issues for women in science. And for a long time, and it's why I continue to do stuff for women in science and why it's important to me too. Because hearing about her experiences, I wouldn't want to have those, and I wouldn't want anybody else to have those or to fall back. And then she also brought in women from other disciplines on campus in science and engineering to speak about their experiences. And she brought in people from industry to talk about their experiences too, and what it's like in the real world, which was also really eye-opening, I thought. If you're not diligent about it, or you don't keep talking about it, you could lapse back to something worse. And that's kind of a little bit scary.
So it sounds like maybe there was a little element of fear of like what we could go back to.
Mm-hmm. But it was also really compassionate, and she was really well spoken about it. She had this energy that was really inspiring, because obviously she's a teaching faculty. She was well respected within her department, involved in science outreach, and she led this program. I don't know how the woman ever slept, but she just was really inspirational. So it's just a really good program to get some exposure to both the academic and the like real life side of being a woman in science.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like there was active community building, like past like the levels of undergrad too. Like she invited other women from like industry and other academic levels.
And I know a lot of people made their friend groups from that, and continue, like they go on to live with those people, or they go on like me to still see them today. So let's get back to our interview where Steffi and I talk about that sense of belonging and what it can do. Just like getting to talk to other women in science, and even if they aren't in my field, it just builds you up in a
Yeah.
very different way than like doing well in a class or something like that does.
Yeah, I think it also helps build resilience too.
I agree. It teaches you that the people you're working with are struggling with the same things. And if they're struggling and you're struggling, it's okay.
And it's one of those things I just really didn't notice, or I didn't appreciate how much of a difference it made until I had nothing. And then you go to a supportive network and you're like, oh, this is what I was looking for all along.
So can I ask you about what it's like to be the only woman in a program and how that makes you feel, or what kind of impacts that might have?
Yeah, great question. So for me, especially, and this is looking back when I was the only woman in a program, I had a lot of doubt and I couldn't talk to anyone where it was coming from, or I was unsure about my abilities, or even someone to acknowledge the microaggressions that I was experiencing, because they can see it too and they've experienced it. And I think there's a different level of understanding where you can say, hey, this person came up to me and told me, what are you doing wearing that? You don't even look like you belong here. And they're like, you know what? People have said that to me and it's horrible and I'm sorry. And then you can just, build that resilience to be like, that guy's a super jerk.
Yeah. I hear you. But that's probably very tough to go through on your own.
Yep.
But what do you think is changing? Do you think it's changing now?
I think things are changing because people are being more vocal. So I am more vocal on social media about this stuff, which means not only do I have my network backing me up, but to be honest, I have men in my field contacting me and being like, hey, let me know when this is happening at this institution or that institution, and I will help you out. I think it's the transition from me feeling like I am fighting a system by myself to me actually relying on other people to help me and to do some of the work that I was doing all by myself.
So what's it like to have men come to you and say, how can I help with this?
It's really empowering because they're offering their help and they're believing me and they want to make changes.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, not so I don't mean it to see like everything's fine and magical right now, right? No, it's going to take time, but there's more people helping, and that's very reassuring to me. So at our professional society, we have allies training, where it's kind of like bystander intervention training, what to do and to step in to stop microaggressions, to stop harm and things like that. And I think when you go through, like I went through a cohort of people who have done that training, so we have our own network. And so next year we train more allies. And so you build it, and then you get people higher up at institutions. And that kind of helps too. If you can get involved in things like that, that kind of helps you grow your network faster.
Do you continue to experience imposter syndrome? Could you maybe highlight a point where you feel like it was the worst or it's gotten better for you?
Right off the bat, I have trouble with the word imposter syndrome because it's putting it on the minoritized population, like it's a problem with you when you're trying to navigate in a system that wasn't designed to include you, right? So I'm just going to put that out there.
No, that's totally 100% valid.
Yeah.
Really good point.
So what I do to acknowledge that I am here for a reason and I deserve to be here is I am continuously updating my resume or my CV, because those are objective things that I have done that no one can take away from me, right? And so reminding yourself of what you've done to get this far, I think helps a lot for me, is reframing it.
Let's pause again to talk about a phrase that comes up quite often during this podcast. What do you think, Michelle, of her definition of imposter syndrome, or why we shouldn't use that word?
There's a lot to think about there, because I'm trying to find a good analogy for it, and how like language about other topics is molded to who's telling the story. And I think that's like where the word imposter syndrome, like that's how that was formed as well. And I totally agree with what she says, that like that the word imposter gives the power to the to the person that's like telling you you're imposter.
No, I
If that
understand
makes
what you're
sense.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
That does make sense. And I think that's the case in a lot of social situations where people who are in power define what's wrong with the system, you know? So shifting the conversation back to the group or the person that isn't in power and using maybe a different way to say their concerns or their feelings might change the conversation and make them feel more accepted and more heard.
Mm-hmm. And there's something about it being called a syndrome, like it's a pathology, something that's wrong with the person that's feeling it. Is like that's
the
inherent.
linguistic concern,
right?
For sure.
It's a shared experience. Like everyone has felt imposter syndrome, so therefore, it's like not typical.
Right.
Like that's what like a syndrome is.
Right.
Something that's not typical, even though everyone feels it.
So how do we change that usage to make it more, we all have this shared experience of feeling that way, and not like singling yourself out in that you feel alone in a certain experience?
Yeah. The language just isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we need to think about more.
Absolutely. Let's go back to Steffi with some solutions. What do you think's the best way to combat that systemic sort of let's only have white men in this field, or let's only promote white men in these certain fields?
I think it's to call out things like all white male panels or manels. If someone's looking for speakers, you give people that are knowledgeable, in the subject and represent the diversity of your field. It's the affinity groups, like WISE or something like that, building those connections and those networks too, and that support that's built in there.
Another thing that you said is is that minorities and women in your field are doing really interesting, kind of unique work. When you include different types of people, you include the spheres that they have around them and the variables and concerns in their lifestyle that they have. Would you say that contributes to these kind of new, unique things that minority groups or women may be doing?
Well, it's diverse perspectives that kind of enrich your field. And there's actually studies out there that show when you have a diverse research group, they're quicker to solve problems and to come up with innovations. So it's acknowledging what's already been shown in scientific research, right?
So we have that research and we're scientists, right? So theoretically, in the perfect world, that would translate over and we'd see these very diverse groups in science, right?
Yep.
But we don't see that. What do you think the barriers are to that?
I mean, oftentimes people choose people to be on their team that look like them or something like that. Also, I will step back and acknowledge part of the reason why I chose engineering was because I just wanted to do science and math. I wanted nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with, human interactions, English classes. So I would think we need to be better, acknowledge that we should be well-rounded people, to learn about other subjects and humanity and, things like that.
After getting your PhD and being one of the only women in that program to get it, how did you feel? Did it make you feel more accomplished that you were one of the few women in this program to actually receive that?
I think for me, I don't take the time to acknowledge something when I've achieved it.
Okay.
I'm always focused on, okay, so I did this. Now I got to get this milestone, right? And so I think I need to be better still at acknowledging what I've accomplished. So I'll say that. So for me, I was very proud because originally, to be honest, they told me I would fail out of that program. So the fact that I made it through that program, I was so proud of myself for that. I'm speaking from my perspective. I feel like I always have to achieve something to prove myself. I think that's just always kind of in the back of my mind, whether I acknowledge it or not. And it is because people question why I'm in certain spaces, right? So I think it's just predisposed to do that.
So moving on so you've just completed your PhD, you've done this really difficult program at Princeton, which is just so impressive. Where did you go after that?
I was hired as a staff scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
Okay, and what did you do in that role?
So for there, I did microwave heating, like fusion experiments around the world.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty fun. I did some modeling too of like we inject cold kind of pellets of fuel into plasmas. That's the fuel for fusion to kind of get them to release a little bit of energy at a time. So I did kind of modeling for that and different experiments. Yeah.
Were there other women that you could work with in that program, or was it still this idea of like 10% women or less?
Oh, it was less.
Okay.
There was only one other in the program, and then she retired, and then it was just me. And then I think at one point we had, when I, before I came here, there was a woman who was a postdoc. But yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what was that like, being the only woman in a group of, I don't know, how many people did you work with at this laboratory?
So in our division, it was like 40 to 60. It was very, very, very lonely and really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what made it easier was I actually went on long-term assignment to a lab in California. It's a fusion lab at General Atomics called the D3D National Fusion Facility. And they had more women there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a network, and we would have lunch together, hang out together. And so that builds, camaraderie, that, resilience and things like that. And that was super important to me.
Let's cut in here again for a minute to think about this. Can you even imagine what it's like to be one woman out of 40 or 60 people?
I mean, I really can't. It's so surprising to me that that's still occurring. I mean, she wasn't a postdoc or working in that role that long ago. So it's still very, very surprising to me that we see this happening, even if her field is so male-dominated. Because 1 out of 40 or 1 out of 60 is a much lower number than 1 out of 10.
Right, yeah. It just sounds so isolating, and it's crazy just like to think if she had like one more person, like to go from no camaraderie to someone that you can rely on. Mm-hmm. Can really make a difference.
Just to have one more would make an impact.
Right.
I agree with you. Let's talk about why Steffi came back to UW-Madison next.
I found that while I liked working at a national laboratory in a big collaborative environment, I really missed the innovation that happens at the universities. I really missed at a couple times I was able to mentor students, and I found that really great because I learned a lot from them through the process, just the way, their ideas are fresh and new, and I found that really brought in more creative aspects to research. So I wanted more of that. When I was an undergrad here, I had some of the best support from some faculty in the College of Engineering. And to me, it's amazing that I had them supporting me as an undergrad. They really pushed me to get to a place where I didn't think I could. And now I get to be colleagues with them. And that's kind of wild.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, that full circle has to be really, really cool, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, is there anything specific that the program you were in at Madison and that you now work in, is there anything specific that they did to kind of push you but also make you feel sort of included?
So when I was an undergrad, I actually took a couple of graduate level classes in plasma physics. And some people could have just laughed at me and been like, why are you taking this graduate level class? You're an undergrad. Mm-hmm. But they just treated me like a grad student. And to me, that made me feel like, okay, I think of these people as the smartest people I know, and they're not doubting my ability. And I really appreciated that. I just liked the way that they treated me with respect, mm-hmm. and they believed in me. I just want to be that person for other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
What, if anything, would you like to see changed in the future for women in your field or your subfield? That works too.
Oh, changed in our because I do a lot of work in our subfield.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say this from the perspective, I mean, yes, I identify as a white woman and, things like I'm from that demographic, so I have those experiences. But really, what I would like to see changed is people listening to minoritized populations when they're bringing about an issue or something.
Mm-hmm.
Not just saying, here's how we address this problem that you're complaining about, and then not listening to the minoritized population when they're telling you the solution.
Would you give any specific advice to young women who are entering your field?
I would say if you get stuck or you're, experiencing harm or something like that, tell someone.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to shoulder it by yourself. You don't have to put up with it. You can tell a faculty member and really don't put up with it.
Mm-hmm.
I put up with so much for so long, and it kind of made me miserable. It was like all these thorns in my side, a lot of the microaggressions, a lot of the sexual harassment. And I just thought I was supposed to sit there and take it. And it just kind of made me like a shell of a person.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started addressing it and calling it out, I found it empowering. It started to make some changes, and I was happier.
Would you say that for like academics or people who are older, maybe having those spaces to go be with women or be with people who look like themselves is empowering?
I think that's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it builds community. So, I mean, on campus, we have the ooey gooey chocolate cake lunch, which is like once a month.
Can you tell me what this is? I don't know what this is.
No, it's women faculty get together and eat cake.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
I know. So, it's things like that that I find helpful. So in my subfield, plasma physics, there are 4 of us on campus, 3 faculty, one scientist, and we occasionally get together. I think that's very helpful too.
Building your own personal support networks within your group.
Yeah.
How do you have the continuing energy for this?
Oh my gosh, for what? Just
no,
everything?
to be a scientist, just like you do research, do your own research, teach.
Yeah.
Be open to, working on issues of diversity and inclusion in your field, and having experienced all these things in the past. A, how do you not become angry about it, I guess? Or, how does it not shut you down? And B, how do you have the continuing energy to maintain doing all that?
That's a great question. How did you say, how do I let it not make me angry?
Yeah.
It makes me angry.
Okay.
And I acknowledge that, and I let myself feel angry, and then I find people to help me. The other things I do is I do outreach too.
Mm-hmm.
I find that helps me be a better scientist as well. Explaining what we do to the public and getting their input, because ultimately, fusion energy, clean energy is for everyone. And making them part of the process is kind of what I do. And so with that, I helped launch the U.S. Fusion Outreach Team. We're a grassroots organization to lower the barriers for outreach for fusion. So it started as a Google group. We have a lot of presentations people can use. But then what sprung out of that was this website called usfusionenergy.org. And it's informing the public, educating them, making them part of the fusion movement, and also diversifying the workforce by anyone who's interested in fusion can find jobs there. So it's kind of branching out and bringing the public in too.
What other types of outreach do you do? Anything specific for minorities and women?
So I've done a workshop that expanding your horizons. I've done that one. And then I've participated in Uw-Whip. It's by American Physical Society, the undergraduate women in physics. I've done work with that too.
And that helps you feel like you're making this change less angry, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, it's putting in the effort, whether it's being trained as an ally, pushing for things in your department for equity and inclusive. I think anytime I'm doing outreach, if I'm bringing people into this field, it's got to be something that's welcoming for them. So it's doing both.
How do you feel after talking with Steffi?
I felt really kind of honored that she shared all this stuff with us, honestly. I really liked her take on balancing and recognizing your emotions and then doing something with that, not to just put it away and hide it in a box and act like a robot, which sometimes I think engineers take that concept a little too far. So her recognition is really powerful. It's a powerful statement to me. And I think she is definitely a role model. She's going to change her student's life in a positive manner just by being who she is so authentically. It's really inspirational, and I really, really enjoyed talking to her.
And she was so like concise in her advice. Like she really gave like some real action items for how you can genuinely feel better, and like how that worked for her, which I think is awesome. And just throughout that whole conversation that you had with her, she really emphasized listening to people, respecting people, and believing in people. And like those are the core. It seems like those are like the core things we can do to make people feel like they belong.
Thanks for listening to our show today. We're your hosts, Mary Riker
And Michelle Chung.
This show was produced by us and Mark Griffin and edited by myself and Mark Griffin. Thanks again to our guest, Dr. Steffy Diem, Assistant Professor of Nuclear Engineering here at Uw-Madison.
And see you next time on Propelling Women in Power.
What would you consider to be your superpower?
Oh, my superpower? Oh gosh. Can I say shoes?
Yes.
Like my shoe collection. I'm just gonna say it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What types of shoes do you have or do you most enjoy?
So my favorite brand is Fluvog, and they are amazing and bright, and I love them. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I used to wear like neon, like bright neon, like Converse and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Shoes
I
are
love
great.
Yeah.